I am so thrilled to be here with my friend Cherlyn Decker, and she is an amazing person and has come to share some really great wisdom, really good golden nuggets with us. Cherlyn is a speaker, a writer, a coach, a spiritual director, and her signature process has helped hundreds of women turn their struggles into a source of strength to propel them forward and not hold them back. That's what we all want, right? Cherlyn believes that it's only when we face our challenges that we can take back control and triumph over them. And so for the past 15 years, Cherlyn has helped hundreds of women not just survive their trials, but use them, learn from them, and find confidence and peace. Cherlyn, I am so glad you're here. Welcome.
Thank you, Stacy. I am just so thrilled to be here. Real life resilience and talking about recovery from life's trauma is so important. And I appreciate how you serve your audience to help them tap into their story and find healing in it.
Thank you. And you know what? We just like connected so quickly because we're like two peas in a pod. We know when we've discovered by our hard-won wisdom some of these things that can help other people. And so you've had some trials and traumas in your life. Share with us maybe one of those and give us a little bit of background on that.
Yeah, it happened in an instant, really. 60% of my income just disappeared. My phone rang and it was my boss, and he says, Cherlyn, I'm sorry, but your position has been eliminated. And I really just collapsed in my chair in my office. There were heavy tears that streaked mascara down my face, and I buried my head in my hands, and I was just like, it's gone. It was just all gone. And I remember that day feeling like all hell broke loose. It was the biggest trial my life, my marriage, my family had ever faced. And I was wondering, I remember thinking, how will I get through this? How will we pay the bills? Was it going to be okay? How did I know it was going to be okay? I was just paralyzed by my circumstances, completely frozen with fear and filled with those questions that just did not stop. I lost a grip on everything, lost who I was, and my life and my finances, of course, became a hot mess. And I realized that that job that I had of climbing the corporate ladder was really not what my life was about. And so over the course of the next 5 years, really things changed. Where I lived changed, where I worked changed, even who I hung out with changed. What I thought about myself, what I believed about God, and even how I prayed, it all just changed. And I'm so thankful that now things are different. I'm not paralyzed by my circumstance anymore. I'm equipped and I can face anything that comes my way. I have an unshakable faith. I'm not collapsed or paralyzed in my fear. And I have the answers and I know where to get them. So these questions that just constantly swirl inside my head, they don't plague me anymore. And I know for your audience, maybe it wasn't a job loss. Maybe it was something else. All of our stories are unique. And I really believe when we're all hit by trials, the difference is, what do we do with them?
Yeah.
I really do believe we can turn our trials into triumph. I've done it. I'm excited to be here to share the story of how. And really, I couldn't have done it without God in my life, just really being my anchor and bringing in some great mentors to guide me along the way. And I'm so glad I can pay it forward.
I absolutely love that because you're right. I mean, there's no, like I've said before, there's no trauma Olympics, but like everybody goes through their own trials. And sometimes the tendency is to like can collapse inward on ourselves, right? And just collapse in a ball of misery, whatever your misery is. And sometimes it's to keep fighting and fight harder and harder and struggle.
Mm-hmm.
But you have found a different way to actually leverage those tough times, right? And make them work for you. If you're going through tough times, might as well make them work for you, right?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we determine, well, I've kind of barely survived, so I'm okay, or I could do better. or maybe we just need more ways to be an overcomer. I think we can all find ourselves in one of those camps. And some of us, by God's grace, haven't been through anything difficult. And so then it's about preparation, about then what do I do when? How
Mm.
can I help someone else walking through that? And that's really the power of being able to learn how to turn our trials into triumph, so that we can do that. We can
I
stop
love
the chaos
that.
swirling. We can and the powerful part is making sure it doesn't come back.
Right.
Because once we learn how to do that, then we are then equipped so that when something else comes along, we know exactly what to do.
Right. I love that you mentioned too helping other people, because like you mentioned, even if you haven't gone through something really traumatic, when you learn this process, you can help somebody else, and
Yes.
you might be the one person that they need
Yeah.
and to get through this. So tell us a little bit about what is your framework? How did you turn your trial into triumph?
It's kind of funny. It's called Unleash Your Roar, because I really do believe we can learn how to roar back at our circumstances. And that seems a little kitschy, but if we think of roar as an acronym for the steps of the process, the first one would be to learn how to respond. That's the first R, knowing how to respond differently than maybe might be part of our DNA or part of our nature or part of our pattern. The second piece of the framework is overcoming obstacles. And this is when we have to realize we can see the obstacles coming. And when we can see them coming, then we can learn how to overcome them.
Mm.
This third part is apply. And that's when we learn to apply what we have learned from past seasons, past struggles. And then the last R is reveal. It's when we reveal our story to others. It's when we begin to share what we have walked through, what we have learned, even maybe if it's not over, and
Mm.
helping tap into the power of community. Because that's the first place we call. We call our mom, we call our girlfriend, we call someone else. We don't
Right.
necessarily reach out to someone who's a guide or a mentor or a coach who can walk them through the process. So the more we can equip people with the tools to get through it on their own, then the more power is out there for the world to be able to help each other. And that's really what it's about.
Wow, I like that roar. So what was the first R again?
Respond.
Respond. Okay, so
Respond.
that's like you said, it's innate. Sometimes it's a learned behavior
Mm.
from our childhood and our family, how they respond, and we just immediately respond with either anger or something like that. Tell us a little bit more. Dig into that one a little bit more.
Yeah. So we know how we want to respond. A lot of times we want to scream, right?
Yeah.
Circumstances have made us angry or frustrated, or we might even be justified because our tension is simmering and our nerves are just like on its, they're frayed. And then we get overwhelmed by our feelings. Our emotions completely take over
Mm.
and we lose our temper.
Yeah.
And then we say something horrible.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that we just immediately feel that guilt. We immediately regret it. We can apologize, but the damage is done. We
Hmm.
can't erase it. We can't, for all of our trying, put those hurtful words back in our mouth. There's no do-overs. And in that process, relationships are damaged, all because of how we responded.
Right.
There was this time that, I've done this too, like probably countless times. But there was one afternoon that's really etched in my memory. And my boss walked into my office and saw that there had been no packing done. I had all week, but I was angry. I was a young leader in a corporate environment. I'd worked so hard to earn my own space,
Mm.
and I didn't want to share my office. It seems so juvenile, but it felt to me like a demotion, like a loss of status. So here she is. She's beginning to help me pack, and I did not respond well. I was not grateful, and I said something nasty. I said
Mm.
something I shouldn't have. And when I look back, I see that it was that comment that kept me from ever getting promoted at that company.
Oh, wow.
You see, Proverbs tells us that the tongue either speaks life or death. And I can look back at my life and I can see wreckage. I can see how using the wrong words made things worse, how they escalated the fight, how they tore people down, how they even destroyed trust. We have to see what comes out of our mouth as either ending conflict or inciting it, as
Mm.
either fueling fire or putting it out. You know, Philippians 2:4 says to not grumble or complain. But it's so easy to get caught in that trap. It's so easy to get our frustrations off our chest, but
Hmm.
those words don't help us. I remember listening to this interview with John Bevere. He's a pastor in Colorado, and he gave this illustration of this water slide. He was talking about how Gratitude is like climbing the ladder. It takes forever to get to the top, but complaining and grumbling is like the slide. It just takes seconds to spiral down. And I realized, as I was listening to that and then reading my Bible, that it was the grumbling and complaining that kept the Israelites in the promised land for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was their words that got them stuck. It was their words which caused an entire generation to miss out on what God has promised. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to get stuck.
Yeah.
I don't want to miss out. I don't want to miss what God has promised. And I don't want my words delaying my breakthrough. And so we have to forget about responding out of anger or grumbling and complaining. And instead, we need to respond with words that have the power to change our circumstances.
Yeah. I like that because, a lot of times that grumbling is not even verbally outside. It's inside. It's in our own heads.
Oh,
and
that's
when
good.
you're doing that, you cannot take action to get yourself out of that situation. You cannot take action that maybe you need to do to improve your circumstances. You're just grumbling. And I guess, I'm thinking of some really tough relationship type situations where you're in a tough relationship and you're grumbling about it and not taking action maybe that you really need to do to improve or get out of that relationship. But that's so it can be external and internal.
Mm-hmm.
Then that kind of leads us to the next step of overcoming obstacles. So how do you overcome those obstacles?
Yeah. So just backing up one step for a half a second, I want to touch on something you just said. Recognizing that, we have these negative words that are coming in our mouth. We have to replace them with something else. And what I recommend that we replace them with is the word of God. It's what he promises about us and our circumstances. It's when we find out what he says and we declare it. That's the power. That's how we take the grumbling and complaining and we turn it into something that can really unlock breakthrough, because he's already said to be grateful. He's already said, that this is what I promised you. There's this experience where Jesus is being tempted in the wilderness, and he's being tempted with all sorts of things, and he just flips back the word. He says, "It is written," and he speaks it out loud,
Right.
and it causes that circumstance to shift. And then the temptation goes away. And we can use that. I'm sure, I'm dating myself here, but if there's this movie scene from The Princess Bride where Inigo Montoya has his sword, right? And he's practicing his declarations, his positive affirmations, right? And he's going out, I think I counted 6 times in the movie where he says, I am Inigo Montoya, who killed my father, prepare to die, right? He says like 6 times. And then he finally gets confronted with the situation and he has something to say to it. And I want to be able to equip your audience and your listeners with powerful things that they can say instead. So I'm glad to share that with you if you're interested of declarations they can speak over their circumstances, because when our mountain feels huge, we need to find those declarations. And I have that, and we can make them available to your audience on the website.
Good. That's awesome. I would love that.
Yeah, I would love that too. Because when we know what God says about our circumstances and we declare it out loud, then we can see our circumstances shift.
Yeah.
And then and then when we get to the overcoming obstacles, Hebrews 13:21 says that God has equipped us with everything we need. And that is so encouraging, because it means that whatever trial has just hit our life, that he saw it coming and that he's made us ready. And so when stuff happens to us, God looks at us and he says, "Girl, you've got this." And to me, that just is just this, like that atta girl in the corner. But yet I look at this layoff that hit my life and I'm like, how was I ready for this?
Right.
And really it's about finding those tools that equips us to see them coming. And, and one of the things I would say about overcoming the obstacle is realizing how powerful our shield of faith is. And you're like, well, how does this relate? Well, because when Paul introduces the shield of faith, he tells us it will extinguish all the flaming arrows of the enemy. So we get this picture, right, from the movie, whether it's Robin Hood or, something older even, and we can see in our minds these flaming arrows that are on fire flying through the air, and we can attribute that and be like, wait, my obstacles are the same way. I can actually see them coming. And we can, because we can realize that there are certain things that are set out for us as traps. Let me give you an example of my friend Karen, who went through one of my programs. She was so frustrated with her boss. She felt like he'd set her up. He had asked her to do something and he didn't get what he wanted. He was mad because she didn't deliver on his expectations. But he asked her over like text message, right? So that's not efficient. That's not effective. But he didn't stop by the office. He didn't call. He sent her a very vague text and he didn't say what he wanted. So she wasn't clairvoyant. So
Right.
she did what the best she could, right? And so my question when we were talking about this caught her off guard. And I said, where did you get caught? Where was the trap? Because that's what the enemy wants to do. He wants to
Right.
camouflage the trap. Then he blames others and he points the finger back at us and he puts on guilt and shame for all the reasons we got into the trap in the first place. But that's not what we need to focus on. If we spot the trap, it's then that we can avoid falling for it again. We can realize, and as soon as Karen saw that, as soon as she saw that he didn't intentionally set her up, but she didn't ask for follow-up questions,
Right.
then the next time, I mean, that seems simple, right? But the next time he did that, she could spot it and then not do the same thing again, because as soon as she recognized it, she could pivot and then change her direction. And it's the same thing with those flaming arrows that the shield of faith works. We can trust God that he has got us, he has equipped us, and that whatever is coming at us, he's going to help us get through it because he said he would. And that's the powerful part of how we compare the declarations of his promises with the trust that he's going to do what he said.
Right. And those obstacles might be even after something like really tough happens, right? So maybe like your layoff, maybe that wasn't the obstacle. The obstacle was, your anger, or the obstacle was, now what are you going to do?
Right.
And you can kind of see some of those things happening and use God's word and his promises to get over those obstacles. So
Exactly right.
love, love,
Because
love
it
that.
could be finances that all of a sudden are now an obstacle and you
Right.
lose your job.
Right.
How you were going to provide for yourself. I mean, that's real. Those
Yeah.
are real things. And those are not being to be dismissive.
Right.
But what I can do is I can partner with God's promises that he's my provider. And I can rest in that. And I can declare that he's going to provide. I might not know what it's going to look like, but maybe it means that, I'm in the line at the coffee shop and somebody pays for my order in advance. Like, it's that whole, we've all experienced that, where we've either had an opportunity to pay for the car behind us or the car in front of us paid for us. It's those small little things that we can be like, you just took care of me.
Right. Love, love, love that. So the next one is applying these lessons. How in the world, how do we do that? How do we apply the lessons?
Yeah, I would say that it is going to be about perspective. That's probably the biggest key of applying the lesson, is recognizing whose perspective we're looking for, because we have to look at the trials differently, because inside of all of our trials is a story. It's the lesson that unlocks powerful keys of breakthrough, because here's the truth. We can't avoid trials in the future.
Right.
I wish we could. It's how we survive one trial that will be an indicator of how we will survive the next one, unless something changes. So when these thoughts bubble up, we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it. We should recognize that sometimes our thoughts and our feelings are liars. If the Bible tells us that the enemy's goal is to steal, kill, and destroy, then we have to realize that he likes to whisper things about us and someone else that may not be true.
Yeah.
And it gets us to doubt. It got me to doubt myself. It got me to wonder. It got me to question. And when we tap into that, when we believe into that lie, it can be pretty powerful. It can really set us back in a lot of things. I mean, one of the stories that I could share is, I remember when I was entering into my business to work for myself, and I was growing in new areas. And we do that. We grow in new areas. We're experts in some and newbies in others, right? And I had an opportunity cancel on me. It was so devastating. And it set me back. It blew my confidence. It really, really did. And then the enemy began to lie to me. He began to say that I wasn't good enough. He began to say that I wasn't cut out for this. He began to say that, I was rejected and that I'm an imposter. All of those things really begin to eat at you until you realize that I can take that thought captive. I can make it surrender, because Philippians 4:8 says to focus on what's true.
Mm-hmm.
And that means I have a choice. That means I am actually in control of what I think and what I feel, and I can filter it as soon as it comes in. So one of the things I can do is I can learn from a past experience where I let negative feelings, negative circumstances come in and deal with, and begin to throw me off course, and then filter it off of what I know to be true.
Right. That's really something to stop and ponder, because, one of the things that we typically do, especially in tough times, is we just want to get through the day. We want to get through this situation. We just want to keep on going, and we don't pause to turn inward and examine our thinking. And when you actually examine your thinking, you're going to find some things there that, like you said, really aren't true. So you when you're telling yourself these things, or I'm never going to find another job, or I'm never going to, make a success of this business, or I'm never going to get out of this situation, or whatever, those, when you look at them in stark black and white, are lies, right? And so when you can separate those and say, you know what, that's not true. What is the truth? And write that down, right? And get it out, and just, because a lot of times our brain hides things from ourselves. And sometimes it can hide the truth from ourselves. But when you're writing and you're getting this stuff out and down, and, where you can really examine what your thinking is, all those lies fade away.
Yeah. And that's why step one is so important, to know what's the truth.
Exactly.
What's the truth? If the truth is that God said he's going to provide for me, then I don't need to worry about how. And that's what we like to do. We like to be doers instead of receivers. Yeah. And it's hard when we have to trust that God is going to do something, but he says he will. So when those lies come around, then we can choose to filter it out. There's this, a client that I worked with who went through one of my programs, and he realized he was easily hurt and offended. And so a quick win for him was one statement: wrong address. It was just like mail delivered to the wrong house. We don't have to accept mail that isn't ours, right? We get it out of the mailbox. We see it's not mine. And then we put it where? Outgoing mail. We give it right back to the post office. This isn't mine. And so we can choose to not let that mail, those bad thoughts, those bad words that someone threw at us, into our heart. We don't have to let it hurt us and offend us. We can actually say wrong address. And then once we do that, we can begin to approach things different. And those things that used to have power over us, those thoughts, those beliefs, they don't have any power anymore.
Yeah. I love that. Okay. So tell me, let's dig into the last R, roar.
Okay.
What's the last R?
Yeah. So the last R is all about revealing our story to others, because what we don't realize is that our story says it's possible. When we share our story, we actually testify it happened. And if it happened for me, it can happen for you, and it can happen for someone else. And so our stories are not just there for us to get breakthrough. They're to help others get it as well. Because the enemy of our souls wants to keep us quiet. When our trials are finally over, he wants us to get on with life. We talked about this a little bit before, just move along. He doesn't want us to be vulnerable about those things that we struggle with. So he heaps on shame. But that's not it. The power of our testimony is what will set people free. We actually overcome the enemy with the power of our testimony. When we share what happens with other people, when we share what God did, when we share how he showed up, then that power of a testimony, the word actually means do it again. And so there's an example I have of, we've all seen something on TV or in some kind of movie, and we can replay the entire scene just by thinking about it. We did this earlier with Princess Bride. You could just see the whole thing happening in your brain, right? And so brain science says that this happens because the scenes have created a memory in our brain. Our testimonies do the same thing. They create a powerful video memory for other people. So when we share our trials, when we share our triumph, and when we share how God came through, we create those memories in other people's brains. So when they're hit with a trial, their brain says, where have I seen a trial like this? And then they remember your story. They remember how Stacy walked through some horrible things. They remember all the other stories that you have shared on your podcast about other people having resilient life. They remember, hopefully, my story of going through my layoff and how I overcome some of that. And then they're like, oh, that choice becomes one in their brain. What also is in their brain is Aunt so-and-so, who they swore they would never be like. But that is an option in their brain. And so they get to choose then who they want to be like.
Right.
So the more we fill our brains with hope, the more we fill our brains with triumph, the more we fill our brains with God's faithfulness, the more we have to choose from.
I love
because that is the power. We get to say and decide, I want to overcome this like somebody else. I want to overcome this like Cherlyn or Stacy.
Yeah.
I want to be an overcomer. I want to turn my trial to triumph.
So that tells me two things. Number one, when we are in the midst of tough times, we need to seek out other people who have stories of triumph. But then, like you mentioned, this last one is share your story with others so that they can have that memory and that triumph once you've gone through that. So that's beautiful. That is beautiful. And here's what I always say. What if someone is just about to go through what you've been through? Or what if someone is in the middle of going through what you've been through? Wouldn't you want to give them a shortcut?
Right.
Wouldn't you want to help them and reach your hand out and pull them up out of that pit? So your story could do that.
Thank you. I think it's really about how we can tap into acceleration.
Yeah.
Because if you have learned a lesson already, and I can tap into what you learned and get myself to the finish line, to the destination, to being over it faster, why would I not do that?
Right.
Why would I sit in my pit and be miserable when there are other people who have survived it, who have a lifeline? And that's what our testimony can be. It can be a lifeline for people.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Oh, this has been amazing. Roar, R-O-A-R. Love it. So where can people find more information about you, Cherlyn?
Oh, thank you for asking. So the best place to go would be my website. That's CherlynDecker.com. And on there, they can get access to my 5 declarations. And this will step them with step 1, where they actually have the things that they can say over certain circumstances in their life. And that will I would love to gift that to, your community. And so they can go there, they can download that, and it will just show up in their email box. And it will be something that will just provide encouragement. And one thing I found is sometimes when we're trying to declare things don't change right away. But it's just like there's this picture I have of I was standing in front of a trash can with the dog food bowls, right? And they're covered in all kinds of nastiness, and I'm scraping it out. And it was taking a little while. And then I finally hit this one spot and it all fell. And so declarations can kind of be like that, where we're saying the same thing over and over and over and over and over, but we're not seeing any initial impact until we finally have that breakthrough, because the declaration has worked. It's changed our thoughts. It's changed our beliefs. It's changed how we respond. And then we realize that trial doesn't have power over us anymore.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful words. And thank you for sharing this. It's a great tool that we can use in our toolbox to help ourselves and also help others to get through those circumstances. We're all going to have those circumstances. There are tough circumstances going on right now, but this is going to help us get through those. So thank you, Cherlyn. I appreciate it.
Oh, you are so welcome. I'm so glad to have been able to serve you and your audience.
Awesome. My name is Stacy Brookman. Women leverage me to unleash their stories and discover their hard-won wisdom so they can command their personal power and emerge resilient and joyful. Because so many are trapped in a cycle of crazy, depleted emotionally, and live with the scars of emotional abuse and low self-esteem. I help them gain clarity from their life lessons, lean on their hard-won wisdom, and have power to feel confident in themselves again. Will you join me? Click here to do so.